Throughout the 1860s, thousands of immigrant workers came to the United States. Most wound up working to build the Transcontinental Railroad, but they were treated poorly.
This structural icon would span from Sacramento, California to Omaha, Nebraska. What was at first an attempt to simplify travel became a power source for trading. They revolutionized the modern world, crossing into a new frontier of more efficient transportation. The Transcontinental Railroad was built between 1863 and 1869.
The Transcontinental Railroad,
Originally known as the Pacific Railroad,
connected the existing eastern U.S. railroad network to the West Coast. This became the first continuous railroad line to cross the United States.
Like I said, the railroad started in Sacramento and ended in Nebraska. But what did they mean?
If you didn't know, Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads finally met at Promontory Summit, Utah. For the building of this icon, there had to be a clear purpose in mind.
Luckily, there were quite a few good reasons to build the railroad.
First of all, there was a vital need to connect the West and East Coast.
For instance, the overland journey across mountains, plains, rivers, and deserts was risky and difficult.
Plus, I would not have had the patience to travel across the country without the railroad.
What do you mean?
Since it was hard to travel across the country, you might have had to go around it. Many westward immigrants chose to travel by sea, taking the 6-month route around Cape Horn at the tip of South America.
Even that isn't safe. You still risk catching yellow fever and other diseases.
Even if you somehow managed to travel across the country, staying safe from every obstacle, it would be super expensive.
I thought it only cost like $1,000.
Yeah, $1,000 before 1868. Add about 155 years of inflation to that, and that equals about $20,000.
Though it was a struggle to move westward, people really wanted to. This trend started as early as the 1840s, spiking in 1848 after discovery of gold. In 1850, almost 60,000 people began the trip to California, and by the end of the decade, more than 300,000 people had made the journey.
The first idea for the Transcontinental Railroad was proposed in the 1830s by New York City dry goods merchant Asa Whitney.
He believed a route like this could have a beneficial effect on the economy.
In 1844, after a 2-year stay in China, Whitney returned, determined to make his dream a reality.
He did this by enlisting the support of the U.S. Congress.
The following year, Zadok Pratt, a successful tanner and a representative from New York's 8th District, presented Whitney's idea to Congress.
In 1852,
Central Pacific Chief Engineer Theodore Judah already had surveyed the railroad's route through the Sierra Nevada in May 1863. And just 5 months later, the busy railroad spiked the first rail.
Luckily, one president hadn't been afraid to set his plan in motion. On July 1st, 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act. This set aside land and money to build a transcontinental railroad.
In addition to clearance, the act also provided different companies to be appointed to build the railroad. There was even a second act to increase funds even further in 1864.
The Union Pacific would begin in the Midwest and work there, while the Central Pacific would begin and work in the, Central.
The Union Pacific workers comprised of hundreds of former soldiers, Irish immigrants, and a Mormon contingent, aka a big group of people, helping lay down the tracks for their areas.
While the Central Pacific Company hired many Chinese workers, eventually they made up the majority of the workforce, yet were paid less than white workers.
In addition to this, 8,000 Irish, German, and Italian immigrants worked there too.
Immigrant workers from the Transcontinental Railroad were paid $1 per day and were 12-hour shifts 6 days per week.
Financially, that was detrimental to them. But at least it couldn't get any worse?
Actually, it could. Workers were seriously injured and even died.
In addition to those explosions from nitroglycerin, more explosions had been happening across the country as a result of the Civil War.
In 1863, the Central Pacific Company had begun laying tracks, but the Union Pacific Company's work had been temporarily halted as a consequence of the Civil War.
Union Pacific was not able to begin laying tracks until the end of the war in 1865, but eventually their efforts paid off.
May 10th, 1869 was a monumental day for America.
It was a day where the dreams of many came to fruition.
Lyndon Stanford, California Senator, founder of the Stanford University, and president of the Central Pacific Railroad Company, was chosen to drive the ceremonial golden spike.
From that moment onwards, the U.S. would never be the same.
There were so many impacts from the Transcontinental Railroad that it's kind of difficult to list them all.
But we're gonna try anyways.
1. The western U.S. was more important.
A once isolated place, California grew into a major economical and political force. This also led to the state's rapid growth.
2. Commerce was available on a vast scale.
By 1880, the Transcontinental transported $50 million worth of freight across the country each year. The railroad even made national trade easier.
Henry W. Brandt, professor and author, explained the Constitution provided the legal framework for a single national market for trade goods. The Transcontinental Railroad provided the physical framework.
Together, they gave the United States the single largest market in the world, which provided the basis for the rapid expansion of American industry and agriculture to the point where the U.S., by the 1890s, had the most powerful economy on the planet.
3. Travel became more affordable.
Oh yeah, weren't we just talking about that?
Yep.
A coast-to-coast trip became 85% less expensive.
That opened up a lot of doors to visit distant places people could only dream of before.
4. Americans lived in new places.
Many Americans lived in small towns popping up alongside the railroad. Most of these were temporary, but some have remained a strong piece of history throughout time.
5. America's concept of reality was altered.
People wouldn't consider traveling and distance in the same way ever again. They even changed how they mark time.
6. The original Amazon was invented.
First mail order catalog was created. The first Transcontinental Railroad and other transcontinental lines that followed made it possible to sell products far and wide without physical storefront, and enabled people all over the country to furnish their homes and keep up with the latest fashion trends.
7. It instilled national confidence.
The Transcontinental Railroad had a major effect on how Americans perceived their nation, and it became a symbol of America's growing industrial power and a source of confidence that led them to take on even more ambitious quests.
It's a transformative moment in American history. From then on, this country would never be the same again. It truly was the
Transcontinental Railroad,
a realization of progress.